The sun had long since fallen out of the sky by the time Josh finished giving Kyle the scoop on Fractal's Define Nano S. Kyle gave his familiar nod of approval as he admired his friend's work, fighting the urge to flail his arms like a marionette on speed, which had long been his trademark.
Actually, he kind of nailed you there.
You know what, whatever. Where do the drives go in this thing?
They're back here.
Flushed with emotion, they stared longingly into each other's eyes.
Emotion?
Longingly? There was no longingly.
Okay, let's just try to...
Yeah, right. I mean, okay. So, what else can we stuff in this thing? No.
Kyle's Freudian slip betrayed his true emotions, his heart taking over for his mind. Choose your own adventure with the Define Nano S from Fractal Design. The case offers custom water cooling options, full-size hardware support, and top-class cable management in a compact design. Click the link in the description for more info.
What's up, guys? So with the recent launch of the RX 480, AMD has focused heavily on bringing virtual reality to the masses by promising a VR-capable graphics card at the $200-ish price point. Meanwhile, Nvidia continues their use of deep learning technology to find the meaning of MSRP. Up until now, we've been seeing VR builds popping up online ranging anywhere from $700 to $1,000, which isn't exactly in reach for the majority of gamers, at least when you're my height. So it got me thinking, as dangerous as that sounds, if we were to use the RX 480 and follow the minimum recommended specs for the Oculus Rift and HTC Vive, what's the absolute least amount of money we could spend on a VR-ready PC? And inevitably, what kind of experience could I hope to achieve in VR poor games? Well, instead of building a fresh system from the ground up, I instantly turned to my Black Friday build that I put together last November for just $400, albeit with the help of some killer Black Friday and Cyber Monday deals. The rig sported an FX 6300, 8 gigs of RAM, and a Radeon HD 7950 packed snugly inside the Fractal Design Core 1000. With all those holiday savings out of the picture, however, I had to make a few part changes to maintain the low cost of the build while hitting those minimum VR specs. So I swapped out the CPU for an FX 8350, changed the Corsair CX power supply for an EVGA 430-watt unit, tossed out the G-Scale RAM for some cheaper HyperX Fury modules in the same capacity, and of course replaced the 7950 with the RX 480 8GB reference model. What I was left with, apart from more empty retail boxes, was a $555 PC that was fully VR ready, at least on paper and according to the 6.7 score in our Steam VR performance test. Now, if I'm being fully transparent, you might think I was a ghost. You might have also noticed that I swapped out the old AMD stock cooler for a fancier Wraith I had lying around, but I left the CPU running at stock speeds. As such, this cooler swap should not affect our gaming performance. I just couldn't hear myself think with the old stock cooler, which I've since donated to my deaf cousin, who thought it was so ugly he donated it to our deaf and blind cousin. Now initially, I planned to overclock the RX 480 for today's testing, but after sources like Tom's Hardware and PC Perspective revealed that the card was drawing power significantly outside the spec of the motherboard's PCIe slot, I've decided to stick to stock speeds until AMD releases a driver update to fix the issue. This topic is thicker than a black man's taste in white women, so if you want more info, I've put links to some relevant articles in the description. And with that, it's time to put the system through its paces. So today we'll be testing 5 games on the Vive and another 5 games on the Rift. Remember that in a best case scenario, we're going to want to see an average of 90 FPS to match the refresh rate of the headset lenses and relatively consistent frame times with few irregularities. Of course, none of that data really matters if we're not getting a perceptibly smooth and enjoyable experience. So starting with our set of games for the HTC Vive, let's take a look at HollowPoint, and you'll have to excuse the crappy footage quality of my monitor here, but I didn't want a Fraps or OBS screen cap recording to affect the performance results. In HollowPoint, we saw an average of 87 FPS, just shy of our 90 FPS goal. While there were some dropped frames introduced, there was too few of them for me to really notice any stuttering whatsoever. Coming from my Core i5 PC sporting a GTX 980 Ti, visually I could see no difference with our budget PC. Frame times were in good shape as well, averaging 11 milliseconds with 99% of all frames staying within 22 milliseconds. The RX 480 stays at a moderate 75 degrees Celsius on average with zero thermal throttling, and also notice how we're only using 30 to 40% of our CPU and memory, a trend we end up seeing with all the games tested on the Vive. Things go a bit haywire when we switch over to hover junkers though, averaging 69 FPS with inconsistent frame times. The data points are nowhere nearly as grouped together as we saw in HollowPoint, indicating frequent instances of judder and frame drops that made the experience less than ideal. Job Simulator brings brings us back to solid gaming with 85 FPS on average, which again, we're losing some frames here, but not enough to perceptibly notice, so this game was a super smooth run through in our headset. Similar results were had in Space Pirate Trainer, averaging 85 FPS, and consistent frame times across the board. This game was an absolute joy to play on our poor man's PC. Saving our most graphically demanding Vive title for last, the Gallery Call of the Starseeds scored just 60 FPS on average, with frame time plot points that are divided worse than a bad boob job. Frame time variants constantly switch between 11 and 22 milliseconds, plaguing the game with constant judder and making the overall experience quite unpleasant. On a side note, it's worth mentioning that the Gallery utilized over 5 gigs of VRAM, so there is a fair chance that the 4 gig RX 480 will be constrained for memory buffer at some point when playing VR. Now, with 2 out of the 5 games on the HTC Vive performing less than adequate, I was a bit nervous to try out the Rift, but I had also forgotten for a moment that the Vive titles are still not quite as developed and often feel like unfinished products compared to what you might find in the Oculus store. So strapping into the Rift, I was delighted to see an average of 89 FPS in the climb, with solid frame timings whose occasional spikes went unnoticed to my eyes. Here we see our CPU and memory are being utilized significantly more than they ever were in the Vive, but not quite to the point where we should be concerned. As we'll see in the rest of our Rift titles, the GPU load of the RX 480 also fluctuates considerably, whereas we saw mostly a constant 100% usage with all of our HTC Vive titles. Whether that's due to Rift games using GPU resources more wisely, or simply being less demanding is hard to say and will likely vary from game to game. Valkyrie was another title that showed great results, 88 FPS on average, and delivering a tightly grouped set of frame times that paved the way for an incredibly immersive and smooth experience. The game scored horribly, however, in my motion sickness test. Again, with Apollo 11, we see a strong average FPS and beautiful frame times, with the 99th percentile scoring just 12 speedy milliseconds. Sounding like a broken record now, Lucky's Tale was a walk in the park, yielding solid numbers all around while barely taxing the hardware of our VR beater rig. Finally, in Oculus Dream Deck, we only saw an 81 FPS average, our lowest score on the Rift. We shouldn't hold those extreme frame time spikes against it though, since that data is a result of the screen going black when switching between scenes in the demo. Still, this was the only test on the Rift where I experienced some occasional judder when moving my head quickly side to side, and even then it was quite minimal compared to the few sluggish titles on its rival platform. Overall, it appears that our humble PC here delivers a rich and fluid VR experience for the Oculus Rift, but tends to be more hit or miss when it comes to the HTC Vive. I'll have to keep a close eye to see if that trend continues as more polished Vive titles hit the Steam store. While this build might be a bit underpowered for someone looking into the Vive, at the same time, I'd almost expect someone on this tight of a budget to have their eyes set on the more affordable Rift. Sure, you'll have to pick up the Oculus Touch controllers separately later this year, but buying your VR setup a piece at a time might just be the way to go if you're strapped for cash. Now, a final thought to consider when building around minimum spec requirements is that while they're good enough for today, there's no guarantee they'll be well suited for the next wave of VR content. It's kind of like buying pants that barely fit, while the McDonald's dollar menu continues to grow more compelling. With that in mind, I would suggest waiting to see what Nvidia has up their sleeve with the GTX 1060, but as of filming this video, I remain impressed with the price to performance of the RX 480 and the VR experiences we've managed to achieve with this $550 machine. That's gonna do it for now, guys, so let me know what you think about this rig in the comments, and don't forget to toss me a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Before you go, check the description below for my Amazon affiliate links and the best damn t-shirts on the interwebs. As always, I'm Kyle with Awesome Sauce Network. Thank you guys for watching, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and I will see you all in the next video.